Chapter 59. This added blow from inconsiderate fortune was quite enough to throw Jenny back into that state of hyper-melancholia from which she had been drawn with difficulty during the few years of comfort and affection which she had enjoyed with Lester in Hyde Park. It was really weeks before she could realize that Vesta was gone. The emaciated figure which she saw for a day or two after the end did not seem like Vesta. Where was the joy and the lightness, the quickness of motion, the subtle radiance of health? All gone. Only this pale lily-hued shell and silence. Jenny had no tears to shed, only a deep, insistent pain to feel. If only some counselor of eternal wisdom could have whispered to her that obvious and convincing truth. There are no dead. Miss Murphy, Dr. Emery, Mrs. Davis, and some others among the neighbors were most sympathetic and considerate. Mrs. Davis sent a telegram to Lester saying that Vesta was dead, but being absent, there was no response. The house was looked after with scrupulous care by others, for Jenny was incapable of attending to it herself. She walked about looking at things which Vesta had owned or liked, things which Lester or she had given her, sighing over the fact that Vesta would not need or use them anymore. She gave instructions that the body should be taken to Chicago and buried in the cemetery of the Redeemer, for Lester, at the time of Gerhardt's death, had purchased a small plot of ground there. She also expressed her wish that the minister of the little Lutheran church in Cottage Grove Avenue, where Gerhardt had attended, should be requested to say a few words at the grave. There were the usual preliminary services at the house. The local Methodist minister read a portion of the first epistle of Paul to the Thessalonians, and a body of Vesta's classmates sang "Nearer, My God, to Thee." There were flowers, a white coffin, a world of sympathetic expressions. And then Vesta was taken away. The coffin was properly encased for transportation, put on the train, and finally delivered at the Lutheran cemetery in Chicago. Jenny moved as one in a dream. She was dazed, almost to the point of insensibility. 5 of her neighborhood friends, at the solicitation of Mrs. Davis, were kind enough to accompany her. At the graveside, when the body was finally lowered, she looked at it. One might have thought indifferently, for she was numb from suffering. She returned to Sandwood after it was all over, saying that she would not stay long. She wanted to come back to Chicago, where she would be near Vesta and Gerhardt. After the funeral, Jenny tried to think of her future. She fixed her mind on the need of doing something, even though she did not need to. She thought that she might like to try nursing and could start at once to obtain the training which was required. She also thought of William. He was unmarried, and perhaps he might be willing to come and live with her. Only she did not know where he was, and Bass was also in ignorance of his whereabouts. She finally concluded that she would try to get work in a store. Her disposition was against idleness. She could not live alone here, and she could not have her neighbors sympathetically worrying over what was to become of her. Miserable as she would be less miserable stopping in a hotel in Chicago and looking for something to do, or living in a cottage somewhere near the cemetery of the Redeemer. It also occurred to her that she might adopt a homeless child. There were a number of orphan asylums in the city. Some 3 weeks after Vesta's death, Lester returned to Chicago with his wife and discovered the first letter, the telegram, and an additional note telling him that Vesta was dead. He was truly grieved, for his affection for the girl had been real. He was very sorry for Jenny, and he told his wife that he would have to go out and see her. He was wondering what she would do. She could not live alone. Perhaps he could suggest something which would help her. He took the train to Sandwood, but Jenny had gone to the Hotel Tremont in Chicago. He went there, but Jenny had gone to her daughter's grave. Later, he called again and found her in. When the boy presented his card, she suffered an upwelling of feeling, a wave that was more intense than that with which she had received him in the olden days. For now her need of him was greater. Lester, in spite of the glamour of his new affection and the restoration of his wealth, power, and dignities, had had time to think deeply of what he had done. His original feeling of doubt and dissatisfaction with himself had never wholly quieted. It did not ease him any to know that he had left Jenny comfortably fixed, for it was always so plain to him that money was not the point at issue with her. Affection was what she craved. Without it, she was like a rudderless boat on an endless sea, and he knew it. She needed him, and he was ashamed to think that his charity had not outweighed his sense of self-preservation and his desire for material advantage. Today, as the elevator carried him up to her room, he was really sorry, though he knew now that no act of his could make things right. He had been to blame from the very beginning, first for taking her, then for failing to stick by a bad bargain. Well, it could not be helped now. The best thing he could do was to be fair, to counsel with her, to give her the best of his sympathy and advice. "Hello, Jenny," he said familiarly as she opened the door to him in her hotel room, his glance taking in the ravages which death and suffering had wrought. She was thinner, her face quite drawn and colorless, her eyes larger by contrast. "I'm awfully sorry about Vesta," he said a little awkwardly. "I never dreamed anything like that could happen." It was the first word of comfort which had meant anything to her since Vesta died, since Lester had left her, in fact. It touched her that he had come to sympathize. For the moment she could not speak. Tears welled over her eyelids and down upon her cheeks. "Don't cry, Jenny," he said, putting his arm around her and holding her head to his shoulder. "I'm sorry. I've been sorry for a good many things that can't be helped now. I'm intensely sorry for this. Where did you bury her?" "Beside Papa," she said, sobbing. "Too bad," he murmured, and held her in silence. She finally gained control of herself sufficiently to step away from him. Then, wiping her eyes with her handkerchief, she asked him to sit down. "I'm so sorry," he went on, "that this should have happened while I was away. I would have been with you if I'd been here. I suppose you won't want to live out at Sandwood now?" "I can't, Lester," she replied. "I couldn't stand it." "Where are you thinking of going?" "I don't know yet. I didn't want to be a bother to those people out there. I thought I'd get a little house somewhere and adopt a baby maybe, or get something to do. I don't like to be alone." "That isn't a bad idea," he said. "That of adopting a baby. It would be a lot of company for you. You know how to go about getting one? You just ask at one of these asylums, don't you?" "I think there's something more than that," he replied thoughtfully. "There are some formalities. I don't know what they are. They try to keep control of the child in some way. You had better consult with Watson and get him to help you. Pick out your baby and then let him do the rest. I'll speak to him about it." Lester saw that she needed companionship badly. "Where's your brother George?" he asked. "He's in Rochester, but he couldn't come. Bass said he was married," she added. "There isn't any other member of the family you could persuade to come and live with you?" "I might get William, but I don't know where he is." "Why not try that new section west of Jackson Park?" he suggested. "If you want a house here in Chicago. I see some nice cottages out that way. You needn't buy, just rent until you see how well you're satisfied." Jennie thought this good advice because it came from Lester. It was good of him to take this much interest in her affairs. She wasn't entirely separated from him after all. He cared a little. She asked him how his wife was, whether he had had a pleasant trip, and whether he was going to stay in Chicago. All the while he was thinking that he had treated her badly. He went to the window and looked down into the Dearborn Street, the world of traffic below holding his attention. The great mass of trucks and vehicles, the counter streams of hurrying pedestrians, seemed like a puzzle. So shadows march in a dream. It was growing dusk, and lights were springing up here and there. "I want to tell you something, Jennie," said Lester, finally rousing himself from his fit of abstraction. "I may seem peculiar to you after all that has happened, but I still care for you, in my way. I've thought of you right along since I left. I thought it good business to leave you the way things were. I thought I liked Letty well enough to marry her. From one point of view, it still seems best, but I'm not so much happier. I was just as happy with you as I ever will be. It isn't myself that's important in this transaction, apparently. The individual doesn't count much in this situation. I don't know whether you see what I'm driving at, but all of us are more or less pawns. We're moved about like chessmen by circumstances over which we have no control." "I understand, Lester," she answered. I'm not complaining. I know it's for the best. After all, life is more or less of a farce," he went on a little bitterly. "It's a silly show. The best we can do is to hold our personality intact. It doesn't appear that integrity has much to do with it." Jennie did not quite grasp what he was talking about, but she knew it meant that he was not entirely satisfied with himself, and was sorry for her. "Don't worry over me, Lester," she consoled. "I'm all right. I'll get along. It did seem terrible to me for a while, getting used to being alone, but I'll be all right now. I'll get along. I want you to feel that my attitude hasn't changed," he continued eagerly. "I'm interested in what concerns you. Mrs. Letty understands that. She knows just how I feel. When you get settled, I'll come in and see how you're fixed. I'll come around here again in a few days. You understand how I feel, don't you?" "Yes, I do," she said. He took her hand, turning it sympathetically in his own. "Don't worry," he said. "I don't want you to do that. I'll do the best I can. You're still Jennie to me, if you don't mind. I'm pretty bad, but I'm not all bad." "It's all right, Lester. I wanted you to do as you did. It's for the best. You probably are happy since—" "Now, Jennie," he interrupted, and he pressed affectionately her hand, her arm, her shoulder. "Want to kiss me for old time's sake?" He smiled. She put her hands over his shoulders, looked long into his eyes, then kissed him. When their lips met, she trembled. Lester also felt unsteady. Jennie saw his agitation and tried hard to speak. "You better go now," she said firmly. "It's getting dark." He went away, and yet he knew that he wanted above all things to remain. She was still the one woman in the world for him, and Jennie felt comforted even though the separation still existed in its finality. She did not endeavor to explain or adjust the moral and ethical entanglements of the situation. She was not, like so many, endeavoring to put the ocean into a teacup, or to tie up the shifting universe in a mess of strings called law. Lester still cared for her a little. He cared for Letty, too. That was all right. She had hoped once that he might want her only. Since he did not, was his affection worth nothing? She could not think. She could not feel that. And neither could he. Chapter 60. The drift of events for a period of 5 years carried Lester and Jennie still farther apart. They settled naturally into their respective spheres, without the renewal of the old-time relationship which their several meetings at the Tremont at first seemed to foreshadow. Lester was in the thick of social and commercial affairs. He walked in paths to which Jennie's retiring soul had never aspired. Jennie's own existence was quiet and uneventful. There was a simple cottage in a very respectable but not showy neighborhood near Jackson Park, on the south side, where she lived in retirement with a little foster child, a chestnut-haired girl taken from the Western home for the friendless, as her sole companion. Here she was known as Mrs. J. G. Stover, for she had deemed it best to abandon the name of Kane. Mr. and Mrs. Lester Kane, when resident in Chicago, were the occupants of a handsome mansion on the Lakeshore Drive, where parties, balls, receptions, dinners were given in rapid and at times almost pyrotechnic succession. Lester, however, had become in his way a lover of a peaceful and well-entertained existence. He had cut from his list of acquaintances and associates a number of people who had been a little doubtful, or overfamiliar, or indifferent, or talkative, during a certain period which to him was a memory merely. He was a director, and in several cases the chairman of a board of directors in 9 of the most important financial and commercial organizations of the West: the United Traction Company of Cincinnati, the Western Crucible Company, the United Carriage Company, the Second National Bank of Chicago, the First National Bank of Cincinnati, and several others of equal importance. He was never a personal factor in the affairs of the United Carriage Company, preferring to be represented by counsel, Mr. Dwight L. Watson, but he took a keen interest in its affairs. He had not seen his brother Robert to speak to him in 7 years. He had not seen Imogene, who lived in Chicago, in 3. Louise, Amy, their husbands, and some of their closest acquaintances were practically strangers. The firm of Knight, Keatley, and O'Brien had nothing whatever to do with his affairs. The truth was that Lester, in addition to becoming a little phlegmatic, was becoming decidedly critical in his outlook on life. He could not make out what it was all about. In distant ages, a queer thing had come to pass. There had started on its way, in the form of evolution, a minute cellular organism which had apparently reproduced itself by division, had early learned to combine itself with others, to organize itself into bodies, strange forms of fish, animals, and birds, and had finally learned to organize itself into man. Man, on his part, composed as he was of self-organizing cells, was pushing himself forward into comfort in different aspects of existence by means of union and organization with other men. Why? Heaven only knew. Here he was endowed with a peculiar brain and a certain amount of talent, and he had inherited a certain amount of wealth which he now scarcely believed he deserved. Only luck had favored him. But he could not see that anyone else might be said to deserve this wealth any more than himself, seeing that his use of it was as conservative and constructive and practical as the next one's. He might have been born poor, in which case he would have been as well satisfied as the next one, not more so. Why should he complain? Why worry? Why speculate? The world was going steadily forward of its own volition, whether he would or no. Truly it was. And was there any need for him to disturb himself about it? There was not. He fancied at times that it might as well never have been started at all. The one divine, far-off event of the poet did not appeal to him as having any basis in facts. Mrs. Lester Kane was of very much the same opinion. Jennie, living on the south side with her adopted child, Rose Perpetua, was of no fixed conclusion as to the meaning of life. She had not the incisive reasoning capacity of either Mr. or Mrs. Lester Kane. She had seen a great deal, suffered a great deal, and had read some in a desultory way. Her mind had never grasped the nature and character of specialized knowledge. History, physics, chemistry, botany, geology, and sociology were not fixed departments in her brain as they were in Lester's and Letty's. Instead, there was the feeling that the world moved in some strange, unstable way. Apparently, no one knew clearly what it was all about. People were born and died. Some believed that the world had been made 6,000 years before. Some that it was millions of years old. Was it all blind chance? Or was there some guiding intelligence? A god? Almost in spite of herself, she felt there must be something. A higher power which produced all the beautiful things. The flowers, the stars, the trees, the grass. Nature was so beautiful. If at times life seemed cruel, yet this beauty still persisted. The thought comforted her. She fed upon it in her hours of secret loneliness. It has been said that Jennie was naturally of an industrious turn. She liked to be employed, though she thought constantly as she worked. She was of matronly proportions in these days, not disagreeably large, but full-bodied, shapely, and smooth-faced in spite of her cares. Her eyes were gray and appealing. Her hair was still of a rich brown, but there were traces of gray in it. Her neighbors spoke of her as sweet-tempered, kindly, and hospitable. They knew nothing of her history except that she had formerly resided in Sandwood, and before that in Cleveland. She was very reticent as to her past. Jennie had fancied, because of her natural aptitude for taking care of sick people, that she might get to be a trained nurse. But she was obliged to abandon that idea, for she found that only young people were wanted. She also thought that some charitable organization might employ her, but she did not understand the new theory of charity which was then coming into general acceptance and practice, namely, only to help others to help themselves. She believed in giving, It was not inclined to look too closely into the credentials of those who asked for help. Consequently, her timid inquiry at one relief agency after another met with indifference, if not unqualified rebuke. She finally decided to adopt another child for Rose Perpetua's sake. She succeeded in securing a boy, 4 years old, who was known as Henry Stover. Her support was assured, for her income was paid to her through a trust company. She had no desire for speculation over the devious ways of trade. The care of flowers, the nature of children, the ordering of a home were more in her province. One of the interesting things in connection with this separation, once it had been firmly established, related to Robert and Lester, for these two, since the reading of the will a number of years before, had never met. Robert had thought of his brother often. He had followed his success since he had left Jennie with interest. He read of his marriage to Mrs. Gerald with pleasure. He had always considered her an ideal companion for his brother. He knew by many signs and tokens that his brother, since the unfortunate termination of their father's attitude, and his own peculiar movements to gain control of the Kane Company, did not like him. Still, they had never been so far apart mentally. Certainly not in commercial judgment. Lester was prosperous now. He could afford to be generous. He could afford to make up. And after all, he had done his best to aid his brother to come to his senses, and with the best intentions. There were mutual interests they could share financially if they were friends. He wondered from time to time if Lester would not be friendly with him. Time passed. And then once, when he was in Chicago, he made the friends with whom he was driving purposely turn into the North Shore in order to see the splendid mansion which the Kanes occupied. He knew its location from hearsay and description. When he saw it, a touch of the old Kane home atmosphere came back to him. Lester, in revising the property after purchase, had had a conservatory built on one side, not unlike the one at home in Cincinnati. That same night he sat down and wrote Lester asking if he would not like to dine with him at the Union Club. He was only in town for a day or two, and he would like to see him again. There was some feeling he knew, but there was a proposition he would like to talk to him about. Would he come, say, on Thursday? On the receipt of this letter, Lester frowned and fell into a brown study. He had never really been healed of the wound that his father had given him. He had never been comfortable in his mind since Robert had deserted him so summarily. He realized now that the stakes his brother had been playing for were big. But, after all, he had been his brother, and if he had been in Robert's place at the time, he would not have done as he had done. At least, he hoped not. Now Robert wanted to see him. He thought once of not answering at all. Then he thought he would write and say no. But a curious desire to see Robert again, to hear what he had to say, to listen to the proposition he had to offer came over him. He decided to write yes. It could do no harm. He knew it could do no good. They might agree to let bygones be bygones, but the damage had been done. Could a broken bowl be mended and called whole? It might be called whole, but what of it? Was it not broken and mended? He wrote and intimated that he would come. On the Thursday in question, Robert called up from the auditorium to remind him of the engagement. Lester listened curiously to the sound of his voice. "All right," he said. "I'll be with you." At noon, he went downtown, and there, within the exclusive precincts of the Union Club, the two brothers met and looked at each other again. Robert was thinner than when Lester had seen him last. and a little grayer. His eyes were bright and steely, but there were crow's feet on either side. His manner was quick, keen, dynamic. Lester was noticeably of another type, solid, brusque, and indifferent. Men spoke of Lester these days as a little hard. Robert's keen blue eyes did not disturb him in the least, did not affect him in any way. He saw his brother just as he was, for he had the larger philosophic and interpretive insight. But Robert could not place Lester exactly. He could not fathom just what had happened to him in these years. Lester was stouter, not gray. For some reason, but sandy and ruddy, looking like a man who was fairly well satisfied to take life as he found it. Lester looked at his brother with a keen, steady eye. The latter shifted a little, for he was restless. He could see that there was no loss of that mental force and courage which had always been predominant characteristics in Lester's makeup. "I thought I'd like to see you again, Lester," Robert remarked, after they had clasped hands in the customary grip. "It's been a long time now. Nearly 8 years, hasn't it?" "About that," replied Lester. "How are things with you?" "Oh, about the same. You've been fairly well, I see." "Never sick," said Lester. "A little cold now and then. I don't often go to bed with anything." "How's your wife?" "Oh, Margaret's fine." "And the children?" "We don't see much of Ralph and Bernice since they married, but the others are around more or less. I suppose your wife is all right?" he said hesitatingly. It was a difficult ground for Robert. Lester eyed him without a charge of expression. "Yes," he replied. "She enjoys pretty fair health. She's quite well at present." They drifted mentally for a few moments, while Lester inquired after the business in Amy, Louise, and Imogene. He admitted frankly that he neither saw nor heard from them nowadays. Robert told him that he could. "The thing that I was thinking of in connection with you, Lester," said Robert finally, "is this matter of the Western Crucible Steel Company. You haven't been sitting there as a director in person, I notice, but your attorney, Watson, has been acting for you. Clever man, that. The management isn't right, we all know that. We need a practical steel man at the head of it, if the thing is ever going to pay properly. I have voted my stock with yours right along because the propositions made by Watson have been right. He agrees with me that things ought to be changed. Now I have a chance to buy 70 shares held by Rossiter's widow. That, with yours and mine, would give us control of the company. I would like to have you take them, though it doesn't make a bit of difference so long as it's in the family. You can put anyone you please in for president, and we'll make the thing come out all right." Lester smiled. It was a pleasant proposition. Watson had told him that Robert's interests were cooperating with him. Lester had long suspected that Robert would like to make up. This was the olive branch, the control of a property worth in the neighborhood of $1.5 million. "That's very nice of you," said Lester solemnly. "It's a rather liberal thing to do. What makes you want to do it now?" "Well, to tell you the honest truth, Lester," replied Robert, "I never did feel right about that will business. I never did feel right about that secretary-treasurership and some other things that have happened. I don't want to rake up the past. You smile at that, but I can't help telling you how I feel. I've been pretty ambitious in the past. I was pretty ambitious just about the time that Father died to get this United Carriage scheme underway. And I was afraid you might not like it. I've thought since that I ought not to have done it, but I did. I suppose you're not anxious to hear any more about that old affair. This other thing, though, might be handed out as a sort of compensation, put in Lester quietly. Not exactly that, Lester, though it might have something of that in it. I know these things don't matter very much to you now. I know that the time to do things was years ago, not now. Still, I thought sincerely that you might be interested in this proposition. It might lead to other things. Frankly, I thought it might patch up matters between us. We're brothers, after all. Yes, said Lester, we're brothers. He was thinking as he said this of the irony of the situation. How much had this sense of brotherhood been worth in the past? Robert had practically forced him into his present relationship, and while Jennie had been really the only one to suffer, he could not help feeling angry. It was true that Robert had not cut him out of this 1/4 of his father's estate, but certainly he had not helped him to get it. And now Robert was thinking that this offer of his might mend things. It hurt him, Lester, a little. It irritated him. Life was strange. I can't see it, Robert, he said finally and determinedly. I can appreciate the motive that prompts you to make this offer, but I can't see the wisdom of my taking it. Your opportunity is your opportunity. I don't want it. We can make all the changes you suggest if you take the stock. I'm rich enough anyhow. Bygones are bygones. I'm perfectly willing to talk with you from time to time. That's all you want. This other thing is simply a sop with which to plaster an old wound. You want my friendship, and so far as I'm concerned, you have that. I don't hold any grudge against you, I won't. Robert looked at him fixedly. He half smiled. He admired Lester in spite of all that he had done to him, in spite of all that Lester was doing to him now. I don't know, but what you're right, Lester, he admitted finally. I didn't make this offer in any petty spirit, though. I wanted to patch up this matter of feeling between us. I won't say anything more about it. You're not coming down to Cincinnati soon, are you? I don't expect to, replied Lester. If you do, I'd like to have you come and stay with us. Bring your wife. We could talk over old times. Lester smiled an enigmatic smile. I'll be glad to, he said, without emotion. But he remembered that in the days of Jennie, it was different. They would never have receded from their position regarding her. Well, he thought, perhaps I can't blame them. Let it go. They talked on about other things. Finally, Lester remembered an appointment. I'll have to leave you soon, he said, looking at his watch. I ought to go too, said Robert. They rose. Well, anyhow, he added, as they walked toward the cloakroom, we won't be absolute strangers in the future, will we? Certainly not, said Lester. I'll see you from time to time. They shook hands and separated amicably. There was a sense of unsatisfied obligation and some remorse in Robert's mind as he saw his brother walking briskly away. Lester was an able man. Why was it that there was so much feeling between them? Had been even before Jennie had appeared. Then he remembered his old thoughts about snaky deeds. That was what his brother lacked, and that only. He was not crafty, not darkly cruel, hence. What a world, he thought. On his part, Lester went away feeling a slight sense of opposition too, but also of sympathy for his brother. He was not so terribly bad, and not different from other men. Why criticize? What would he have done if he had been in Robert's place? Robert was getting along. So was he. He could see now how it all came about. Why he had been made the victim. Why his brother had been made the keeper of the great fortune. It's the way the world runs, he thought. What difference does it make? I have enough to live on. Why not let it go at that? Chapter 61. The days of man under the old dispensation, or rather, according to the supposedly biblical formula, which persists, are 80 years and 10. It is so ingrained in the race consciousness by mouth-to-mouth utterance that it seems the profoundest of truths. As a matter of fact, man, even under his mortal illusion, is organically built to live 5 times the period of his maturity, and would do so if he but knew that it is spirit which endures, that age is an illusion, and that there is no death. Yet the race thought, gained from what dream of materialism we know not, persists, and the death of man under the mathematical formula so fearfully accepted is daily registered. Lester was one of those who believed in this formula. He was nearing 60. He thought he had, say, 20 years more at the utmost to live. Perhaps not so long. Well, he had lived comfortably. He felt that he could not complain. If death was coming, let it come. He was ready at any time. No complaint or resistance would issue from him. Life, in most of its aspects, was a silly show anyhow. He admitted that it was mostly illusion, easily proved to be so. That it might all be one he sometimes suspected. It was very much like a dream in its composition, truly. Sometimes like a very bad dream. All he had to sustain him in his acceptance of its reality from hour to hour and day to day was apparent contact with this material proposition, and that people, meetings of board of directors, individuals and organizations planning to do this and that, his wife's social functions. Letty loved him as a fine, grizzled example of a philosopher. She admired, as Jennie had, his solid, determined, phlegmatic attitude in the face of troubled circumstance. All the winds of fortune or misfortune could not apparently excite or disturb Lester. He refused to be frightened. He refused to budge from his beliefs and feelings, and usually had to be pushed away from them, still believing, if he were gotten away at all. He refused to do anything save, as he always said, look the facts in the face and fight. He could be made to fight easily enough if imposed upon, but only in a stubborn, resisting way. His plan was to resist every effort to coerce him to the last ditch. If he had to let go in the end, he would when compelled. But his views as to the value of not letting go were quite the same even when he had to let go under compulsion. His views of living were still decidedly material, grounded in creature comforts, and he had always insisted upon having the best of everything. If the furnishings of his home became the last dingy, he was for having them torn out and sold and the house done over. If he traveled, money must go ahead of him and smooth the way. He did not want argument, useless talk, or silly palaver, as he called it. Everyone must discuss interesting topics with him or not talk at all. Letty understood him thoroughly. She would chuck him under the chin mornings, or shake his solid head between her hands, telling him he was a brute, but a nice kind of brute. Yes, yes, he would growl. I know. I'm an animal, I suppose. You're a seraphic suggestion of attenuated thought. No, you hush, she would reply. For at times he could cut like a knife without really meaning to be unkind. And he would pet her a little, for, in spite of her vigorous conception of life, he realized that she was more or less dependent upon him. It was always so plain to her that he could get along without her. For reasons of kindliness, he was trying to conceal this, to pretend the necessity of her presence. But it was so obvious that he really could dispense with her easily enough. Now Letty did depend on Lester. It was something, in so shifty and uncertain a world, to be near so fixed and determined a quantity as this bear man. It was like being close to a warmly glowing lamp in the dark, or a bright burning fire in the cold. Lester was not afraid of anything. He felt that he knew how to live and to die. It was natural that a temperament of this kind should have its solid material manifestation at every point. Having his financial affairs well in hand, most of his holding being shares of big companies, where boards of solemn directors merely approved the strenuous efforts of ambitious executives to make good, he had leisure for living. He and Letty were fond of visiting the various American and European watering places. He gambled a little, for he found that there was considerable diversion in risking interesting sums on the spin of a wheel, or the fortuitous roll of a ball. And he took more and more to drinking, not in the sense that a drunkard takes to it, but as a high liver, socially and with all his friends. He was inclined to drink the richer drinks, when he did not take straight whiskey. Champagne, sparkling burgundy, the expensive and effervescent white wines. When he drank, he could drink a great deal, and he ate in proportion. Nothing must be served but the best. Soup, fish, entree, roast, game, dessert, everything that made up a showy dinner, and he had long since determined that only a high-priced chef was worthwhile. They had found an old cordon bleu, Louis Bordeaux, who had served in the house of one of the great dry goods princes, and this man he engaged. He cost Lester $100 a week, but his reply to any question was that he only had one life to live. The trouble with this attitude was that it adjusted nothing, improved nothing, left everything to drift on toward an indefinite end. If Lester had married Jennie and accepted the comparatively meager income of $10,000 a year, he would have maintained the same attitude to the end. It would have led him to a stolid indifference to the social world of which now necessarily he was a part. He would have drifted on with a few mentally compatible cronies who would have accepted him for what he was, a good fellow. And Jennie, in the end, would not have been so much better off than she was now. One of the changes which was interesting was that the Canes transferred their residence to New York. Mrs. Cane had become very intimate with a group of clever women in the Eastern 400, or 900, and had been advised and urged to transfer the scene of her activities to New York. She finally did so, leasing a house in 78th Street near Madison Avenue. She installed a novelty for her, a complete staff of liveried servants after the English fashion, and had the rooms of her house done in correlative periods. Lester smiled at her vanity and love of show. "You talk about your democracy," he grunted one day. "You have as much democracy as I have religion, and that's none at all." "Why, you talk," she denied. "I am democratic. We all run in classes. You do. I'm merely accepting the logic of the situation." "The logic of your grandmother? Do you call a butler and a doorman in red velvet a part of the necessity of the occasion?" "I certainly do," she replied. "Maybe not the necessity exactly, but the spirit, surely. Why should you quarrel? You're the first one to insist on perfection. To quarrel if there is any flaw in the order of things." "You've never heard me quarrel." "Oh, I don't mean that literally, but you demand perfection, the exact spirit of the occasion, and you know it." "Maybe I do, but what is that to do with your democracy?" "I am democratic. I insist on it. I'm as democratic in spirit as any woman. Only I see things as they are, and conform as much as possible for comfort's sake. And so do you. Don't you throw rocks at my glass house, Mr. Master. Yours is so transparent I can see every move you make." "I'm democratic, and you're not," he teased. But he approved thoroughly of everything she did. She was, he sometimes fancied, a better executive in her world than he was in his. Drifting in this fashion, wining, dining, drinking the waters of this curative spring and that, traveling in luxurious ease and taking no physical exercise, finally altered his body from a vigorous, quick-moving, well-balanced organism into one where a plethora of substance was clogging every essential function. His liver, kidneys, spleen, pancreas, every organ, in fact, had been overtaxed for some time to keep up the process of digestion and elimination. In the past 7 years, he had become uncomfortably heavy. His kidneys were weak, and so were the arteries of his brain. By dieting, proper exercise, the right mental attitude, he might have lived to be 80 or 90. As a matter of fact, he was allowing himself to drift into a physical state in which even a slight malady might prove dangerous. The result was inevitable, and it came. It so happened that he and Letty had gone to the North Cape on a cruise with a party of friends. Lester, in order to attend to some important business, decided to return to Chicago late in November. He arranged to have his wife meet him in New York just before the Christmas holidays. He wrote Watson to expect him and engaged rooms at the auditorium, where he had sold the Chicago residence some 2 years before and was now living permanently in New York. One late November day, after having attended to a number of details and cleared up his affairs very materially, Lester was seized with what the doctor who was called to attend him described as a cold in the intestines, a disturbance usually symptomatic of some other weakness, either of the blood or of some organ. He suffered great pain, and the usual remedies in that case were applied. There were bandages of red flannel with a mustard dressing, and specifics were also administered. He experienced some relief, but he was troubled with the sense of impending disaster. He had Watson cable his wife. There was nothing serious about it, but he was ill. A trained nurse was in attendance, and his valet stood guard at the door to prevent annoyance of any kind. It was plain that Letty could not reach Chicago under 3 weeks. He had the feeling that he would not see her again. Curiously enough, not only because he was in Chicago, but because he had never been spiritually separated from Jennie, he was thinking about her constantly at this time. He had intended to go out and see her just as soon as he was through with his business engagements and before he left the city. He had asked Watson how she was getting along, and he had been informed that everything was well with her. She was living quietly and looking in good health, so Watson said. Lester wished he could see her. This thought grew as the days passed, and he grew no better. He was suffering from time to time with severe attacks of griping pains that seemed to tie his viscera into knots and left him very weak. Several times the physician administered cocaine with a needle in order to relieve him of the useless pain. After one of the severe attacks, he called Watson to his side, told him to send the nurse away, and then said, "Watson, I'd like you to have me do a favor. I'd like to have you do me a favor. Ask Mrs. Stover if she won't come here to see me. You better go and get her. Just send the nurse and Kozo, the valet, away for the afternoon, or while she's here. If she comes at any other time, I'd like to have her admitted." Watson understood. He liked this expression of sentiment. He was sorry for Jennie. He was sorry for Lester. He wondered what the world would think if it could know of this bit of romance in connection with so prominent a man. Lester was decent. He had made Watson prosperous. The latter was only too glad to serve him in any way. He called a carriage and rode out to Jennie's residence. He found her watering some plants. Her face expressed her surprise at his unusual presence. "I come on a rather troublesome errand, Mrs. Stover," he said, using her assumed name. That is, Mr. Kane is quite sick at the auditorium. His wife is in Europe, and he wanted to know if I wouldn't come out here and ask you to come and see him. He wanted me to bring you, if possible. Could you come with me now?" "Why, yes," said Jennie, her face a study. The children were in school. An old Swedish housekeeper was in the kitchen. She could go as well as not, but there was coming back to her in detail a dream she had had several nights before. It had seemed to her that she was out on a dark, mystic body of water over which was hanging something like a fog or a pall of smoke. She heard the water ripple or stir faintly, and then out of the surrounding darkness a boat appeared. It was a little boat, oarless, or not visibly propelled, and in it were her mother and Vesta, and someone whom she could not make out. Her mother's face was pale and sad, very much as she had often seen it in life. She looked at Jennie solemnly, sympathetically, and then suddenly Jennie realized that the third occupant of the boat was Lester. He looked at her gloomily, an expression she had never seen on his face before. And then her mother remarked, "Well, we must go now." The boat began to move. A great sense of loss came over her, and she cried, "Don't leave me, Mama." But her mother only looked out at her out of the deep, sad, still eyes, and the boat was gone. She woke with a start, half fancying that Lester was beside her. She stretched out her hand to touch his arm. Then she drew herself up in the dark and rubbed her eyes, realizing that she was alone. A great sense of depression remained with her, and for 2 days it haunted her. Then, when it seemed as if it were nothing, Mr. Watson appeared with his ominous message. She went to dress and reappeared, looking as troubled as were her thoughts. She was very pleasing in her appearance, yet a sweet, kindly woman, well-dressed and shapely. She had never been separated mentally from Lester, just as he had never grown entirely away from her. She was always with him in thought, just as in the years when they were together. Her fondest memories were of the days when he first courted her in Cleveland, the days when he had carried her off, much as the caveman seized by his mate by force. Now she longed to do what she could for him, for this call was as much a testimony as a shock. He loved her. He loved her, after all. The carriage rolled briskly through the long streets into the smoky downtown district. It arrived at the auditorium, and Jennie was escorted to Lester's room. Watson had been considerate. He had talked little, leaving her to her thoughts. In this great hotel, she felt diffident after so long a period of complete retirement. As she entered the room, she looked at Lester with large, gray, sympathetic eyes. He was lying propped up on 2 pillows, his solid head with its growth of once dark brown hair slightly grayed. He looked at her curiously out of his wise old eyes, a light of sympathy and affection shining in them, weary as they were. Jennie was greatly distressed. His pale face, slightly drawn from suffering, cut her like a knife. She took his hand, which was outside the coverlet, and pressed it. She leaned over and kissed his lips. "I'm so sorry, Lester," she murmured. "I'm so sorry. You're not very sick, though, are you?" "You must get well, Lester, and soon." She patted his hand gently. "Yes, Jennie, but I'm pretty bad," he said. "I don't feel right about this business. I don't seem able to shake it off, but tell me, how have you been?" "Oh, just the same, dear," she replied. "I'm all right. You mustn't talk like that, though. You're going to be all right very soon now." He smiled grimly. "Do you think so?" He shook his head, for he thought differently. "Sit down, dear," he went on. "I'm not worrying about that. I want to talk to you again. I want you near me." He sighed and shut his eyes for a minute. She drew up a chair close beside the bed, her face toward his, and took his hand. It seemed such a beautiful thing that he should send for her. Her eyes showed the mingled sympathy, affection, and gratitude of her heart. At the same time, fear gripped her. How ill he looked. "I can't tell what may happen," he went on. "Letty is in Europe. I wanted to see you again for some time. I was coming out this trip. We are living in New York, you know. You're a little stouter, Jennie." "Yes, I'm getting old, Lester," she smiled. "Oh, that doesn't make any difference," he replied, looking at her fixedly. "Age doesn't count. We're all in that boat. It's how we feel about life." He stopped and stared at the ceiling. A slight twinge of pain reminded him of the vigorous seizures he had been through. He couldn't stand many more paroxysms like the last one. "I couldn't go, Jennie, without seeing you again," he observed, when the slight twinge ceased and he was free to think again. "I've always wanted to say to you, Jennie," he went on, "that I haven't been satisfied with the way we parted. It wasn't the right thing, after all. I haven't been any happier. I'm sorry. I wish now, for my own peace of mind, that I hadn't done it." "Don't say that, Lester," she demurred, going over in her mind all that had been between them. This was such a testimony to their real union, their real spiritual compatibility. It's all right. It doesn't make any difference. You've been very good to me. I wouldn't have been satisfied to have you lose your fortune. It couldn't be that way. I've been a lot better satisfied as it is. It's been hard, but your everything is hard sometimes. Everything is hard at times, she paused. No, he thought. No, he said. It wasn't right. The thing wasn't worked out right from the start, but it wasn't your fault. I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you that. I'm glad I'm here to do it. Don't talk that way, Lester. Please don't, she pleaded. It's all right. You needn't be sorry. There's nothing to be sorry for. You've always been so good to me. Why, when I think... She stopped, for it was hard for her to speak. She was choking with affection and sympathy. She pressed his hands. She was recalling the house he took for her family in Cleveland, his generous treatment of Gerhardt, all the long ago tokens of love and kindness. Well, I've told you now, and I feel better. You're a good woman, Jenny, and you're kind to come to me this way. I loved you. I love you now. I want to tell you that. It seems strange, but you're the only woman I ever did love truly. We should have never parted. Jenny caught her breath. It was the one thing she had waited for all these years, this testimony. It was the one thing that could make everything right, this confession of spiritual, if not material union. Now she could live happily. Now die so. Oh, Lester, she exclaimed with a sob and pressed his hand. He returned the pressure. There was a little silence. Then he spoke again. How are the two orphans? He asked. Oh, they're lovely, she answered, entering upon a detailed description of their diminutive personalities. He listened comfortably, for her voice was soothing to him. Her whole personality was grateful to him. When it came time for her to go, he seemed desirous of keeping her. Going, Jenny? I can stay just as well as not, Lester, she volunteered. I'll take a room. I can send a note out to Mrs. Swenson. It'll be all right. You needn't do that, he said. But she could see that he wanted her, that he did not want to be alone. From that time on until the hour of his death, she was not out of the hotel. Chapter 62. The end came after 4 days, during which Jenny was by his bedside almost constantly. The nurse in charge welcomed her at first as a relief and company, but the physician was inclined to object. Lester, however, was stubborn. This is my death, he said, with a touch of grim humor. If I'm dying, I ought to be allowed to die in my own way. Watson smiled at the man's unfaltering courage. He had never seen anything like it before. There were cards of sympathy, calls of inquiry, notices in the newspaper. Robert saw an item in the Enquirer and decided to go to Chicago. Imogene called with her husband, and they were admitted to Lester's room for a few minutes after Jenny had gone to hers. Lester had little to say. The nurse cautioned them that he was not to be talked to much. When they were gone, Lester said to Jennie, "Imogene has changed a good deal." He made no other comment. Mrs. Kane was on the Atlantic 3 days out from New York the afternoon Lester died. He had been meditating whether anything more could be done for Jennie, but he could not make up his mind about it. Certainly it was useless to leave her more money. She did not want it. He had been wondering where Letty was and how near her actual arrival might be when he was seized with a tremendous paroxysm of pain. Before relief could be administered in the shape of an anesthetic, he was dead. It developed afterward that it was not the intestinal trouble which killed him, but a lesion of a major blood vessel in the brain. Jennie, who had been strongly wrought up by watching and worrying, was beside herself with grief. He had been a part of her thought and feeling so long that it seemed now as though a part of herself had died. She had loved him as she had fancied she could never love anyone, and he had always shown that he cared for her, at least in some degree. She could not feel the emotion that expresses itself in tears. Only a dull ache, a numbness which seemed to make her insensible to pain. He looked so strong, her Lester, lying there still in death. His expression was unchanged, defiant, determined, albeit peaceful. Word had come from Mrs. Kane that she would arrive on the Wednesday following. It was decided to hold the body. Jennie learned from Mr. Watson that it was to be transferred to Cincinnati, where the Paces had a vault. Because of the arrival of various members of the family, Jennie withdrew to her own home. She could do nothing more. The final ceremonies presented a peculiar commentary on the anomalies of existence. It was arranged with Mrs. Kane by wire that the body should be transferred to Imogene's residence, and the funeral held from there. Robert, who arrived the night Lester died, Barry Dodge, Imogene's husband, Mr. Midgley, and 3 other citizens of prominence were selected as pallbearers. Louise and her husband came from Buffalo. Amy and her husband from Cincinnati. The house was full to overflowing with citizens who either sincerely wished or felt it expedient to call. Because of the fact that Lester and his family were tentatively Catholic, a Catholic priest was called in and the ritual of that church was carried out. It was curious to see him lying in the parlor of this alien residence, candles at his head and feet, burning sepulchrally, a silver cross upon his breast, caressed by his waxen fingers. He would have smiled if he could have seen himself, but the Kane family was too conventional, too set in its convictions to find anything strange in this. The church made no objection, of course. The family was distinguished. What more could be desired? On Wednesday, Mrs. Kane arrived. She was greatly distraught, for her love, like Jennie's, was sincere. She left her room that night when all was silent and leaned over the coffin, studying by the light of the burning candles Lester's beloved features. Tears trickled down her cheeks, for she had been happy with him. She caressed his cold cheeks and hands. "Poor dear Lester," she whispered. "Poor brave soul." No one told her that he had sent for Jennie. The Kane family did not know. Meanwhile, in the house on South Park Avenue sat a woman who was enduring alone the pain, the anguish of an irreparable loss. For all these years, the subtle hope had persisted, in spite of every circumstance, that somehow life might bring him back to her. He had come, it is true. He really had in death, but he had gone again. Where? whither her mother, whither Gerhardt, whither Vesta had gone. She could not hope to see him again, for the papers had informed her of his removal to Mrs. Midgley's residence, and of the fact that he was to be taken from Chicago to Cincinnati for burial. The last ceremonies in Chicago were to be held in one of the wealthy Roman Catholic churches on the south side, St. Michael's, of which the Midgleys were members. Jennie felt deeply about this. She would have liked so much to have had him buried in Chicago, where she could go to the grave occasionally. But this was not to be. She was never a master of her fate. Others invariably controlled. She thought of him as being taken from her finally by the removal of the body to Cincinnati, as though distance made any difference. She decided at last to veil herself heavily and attend the funeral at the church. The paper had explained that the services would be at 2 p.m. Then, at 4, the body would be taken to the depot and transferred to the train. The members of the family would accompany it to Cincinnati. She thought of this as another opportunity. She might go to the depot. A little before the time for the funeral cortege to arrive at the church, there appeared at one of its subsidiary entrances a woman in black, heavily veiled, who took a seat in an inconspicuous corner. She was a little nervous at first, for seeing that the church was dark and empty, she feared lest she had mistaken the time and place. But after 10 minutes of painful suspense, a bell in the church tower began to toll solemnly. Shortly thereafter, an acolyte in black gown and white surplice appeared, and lighted groups of candles on either side of the altar. A hushed stirring of feet in the choir loft indicated that the service was to be accompanied by music. Some loiterers, attracted by the bell, some idle strangers, a few acquaintances and citizens not directly invited appeared and took seats. Jennie watched all this with wondering eyes. Never in her life had she been inside a Catholic church. The gloom, the beauty of the windows, the whiteness of the altar, the golden flames of the candles impressed her. She was suffused with a sense of sorrow, loss, beauty, and mystery. Life, in all its vagueness and uncertainty, seemed typified by this scene. As the bell tolled, there came from the sacristy a procession of altar boys. The smallest, an angelic youth of 11, came first, bearing aloft a magnificent silver cross. In the hands of each subsequent pair of servitors was held a tall lighted candle. The priest, in black cloth and lace, attended by an acolyte on either hand, followed. The procession passed out the entrance into the vestibule of the church and was not seen again until the choir began a mournful, responsive chant, the Latin supplication for mercy and peace. Then, at this sound, the solemn procession made its reappearance. There came the silver cross, the candles, the dark-faced priest, reading dramatically to himself as he walked, and the body of Lester in a great black coffin with silver handles carried by the pallbearers, who kept an even pace. Jennie stiffened perceptibly, her nerves responding as though to a shock from an electric current. She did not know any of these men. She did not know Robert. She had never seen Mr. Midgley. Of the long company of notables who followed 2 by 2, she recognized only 3, whom Lester had pointed out to her in times past. Mrs. Kane, she saw, of course, for she was directly behind the coffin, leaning on the arm of a stranger. Behind her walked Mr. Watson, solemn, gracious. He gave a quick glance to either side, evidently expecting to see her somewhere. But not finding her, he turned his eyes gravely forward and walked on. Jennie looked with all her eyes, her heart gripped by pain. She seemed so much a part of the solemn ritual, and yet infinitely removed from it all. The procession reached the altar rail, and the coffin was put down. A white shroud bearing the insignia of suffering, a black cross, was put over it, and the great candles were set beside it. There were the chanted invocations and responses, the sprinkling of the coffin with holy water, the lighting and swinging of the censer, and then the mumbled responses of the auditors to the Lord's Prayer. And to its Catholic edition, the invocation of the Blessed Virgin. Jennie was overawed and amazed, but no show of form, colorful impression, imperial, could take away the sting of death, the sense of infinite loss. To Jennie, the candles, the incense, the holy song were beautiful. They touched the deep chord of melancholy in her and made it vibrate through the depths of her being. She was as a house filled with mournful melody in the presence of death. She cried and cried. She could see, curiously, that Mrs. Kane was sobbing convulsively also. When it was all over, the carriages were entered and the body was borne to the station. All the guests and strangers departed. And finally, when all was silent, she arose. Now she would go to the depot also, for she was hopeful of seeing his body put on the train. They would have to bring it out on the platform just as they did in Vesta's case. She took a car, and a little later she entered the waiting room of the depot. She lingered about, first in the concourse where the great iron fence separated the passengers from the tracks, and then in the waiting room, hoping to discover the order of proceedings. She finally observed the group of immediate relatives waiting: Mrs. Kane, Robert, Mrs. Midgley, Louise, Amy, Imogene, and the others. She actually succeeded in identifying most of them, though it was not knowledge in this case, but pure instinct and intuition. No one had noticed it in the stress of excitement, but it was Thanksgiving Eve. Throughout the great railroad station there was a hum of anticipation, that curious ebullition of fancy which springs from the thought of pleasures to come. People were going away for the holiday. Carriages were at the station entries. Announcers were calling in the stentorian voices the destination of each new train as the time of its departure drew near. Jennie heard with a desperate ache the description of a route which she and Lester had taken more than once, slowly and melodiously emphasized. Detroit, Toledo, Cleveland, Buffalo, and New York. There were cries of trains for Fort Wayne, Columbus, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and points east. And then finally, for Indianapolis, Louisville, Columbus, Cincinnati, and points south. The hour had struck. Several times Jennie had gone to the concourse between the waiting room and the tracks to see if through the iron grating which separated her from her beloved she could get one last look at the coffin, or the great wooden box which held it, before it was put on the train. Now she saw it coming. There was a baggage porter pushing a truck into position near the place where the baggage car would stop. On it was Lester, the last shadow of his substance, encased in the honors of wood and cloth and silver. There was no thought on the part of the porter of the agony of loss which was represented there. Here. He could not see how wealth and position in this hour were typified to her mind as a great fence, a wall, which divided her eternally from her beloved. Had it not always been so? Was not her life a patchwork of conditions made and affected by these things which she saw, wealth and force, which had found her unfit? She had evidently been born to yield, not seek. This panoply of power had been paraded before her since childhood. What could she do now but stare vaguely after it as it marched triumphantly by? Lester had been of it. Him it respected. Of her it knew nothing. She looked through the grating, and once more there came the cry of Indianapolis, Louisville, Columbus, Cincinnati, and points south. A long red train, brilliantly lighted, composed of baggage cars, day coaches, a dining car set with white linen and silver, and a half-dozen comfortable Pullmans rolled in and stopped. A great black engine, puffing and glowing, had it all safely in tow. As the baggage car drew near, the waiting truck, a train hand in blue, looking out of the car, called to someone within, "Hey, Jack, give us a hand here. There's a stiff outside." Jennie could not hear. All she could see was the great box that was so soon to disappear. All she could feel was that this train would start presently, and then it would all be over. The gates opened. The passengers poured out. There was Robert and Amy and Louise and Midgley, all making for the Pullman cars in the rear. They had said their farewells to their friends. No need to repeat them. A trio of assistants gave a hand at getting the great wooden case into the car. Jennie saw it disappear with an acute physical wrench at her heart. There were many trunks to be put aboard, and then the door of the baggage car half closed, but not before the warning bell of the engine sounded. There was an insistent calling of "all aboard" from this quarter and that, and slowly the great locomotive began to move. Its bell was ringing, its steam hissing, its smokestack throwing aloft a great black plume of smoke that fell back over the cars like a pall. The fireman, conscious of the heavy load behind, flung open a flaming furnace door to throw in a coal. Its light glowed like a glowing golden eye. Jennie stood rigid, staring into the wonder of this picture, her face white, her eyes wide, her hands unconsciously clasped, but one thought in her mind: they were taking his body away. A leaden November sky was ahead, almost dark. She looked and looked until the last glimmer of the red lamp on the receding sleeper disappeared in the maze of smoke and haze overhanging the tracks of the far-stretching yard. "Yes," said the voice of a passing stranger, gay with the anticipation of coming pleasures. "We're going to have a great time down there, remember, Annie? Uncle Jim is coming, and Aunt Ella." Jennie did not hear that or anything else of the chatter and bustle around her. Before her was a stretching vista of lonely years, down which she was steadily gazing. Now what? She was not so old yet. There were those 2 orphan children to raise. They would marry and leave after a while, and then what? Days and days in endless reiteration. And then the end.